Gather round, friends, and let the shadows lengthen. Pour yourself something to cut the dust, and listen. I want to talk about the quiet places. Out here, in the vast, sun-scorched heart of the American West, you find them tucked away in valleys, nestled by creeks that whisper secrets to the cottonwoods. Towns built on hope and sweat, maybe a lucky strike of gold or silver, or just the stubborn human need to put down roots, even in unfriendly soil. Places where folks try to carve out a measure of peace, a life free from the troubles they left behind, or the ones they know are prowling just over the next ridge. Harmony Gulch was one such place. Sounded peaceful, didn't it? Harmony. And for a time, it almost lived up to the name. Almost. But peace in the West? Well, it was often just a pause between storms, a held breath, because the same vastness that offered solitude and a fresh start also offered refuge to men whose hearts knew no harmony, only violence and greed. Men who rode hard, lived rough, and saw quiet towns not as communities, but as opportunities. Fattened calves waiting for the wolves. This story, it's about what happens when the wolves come calling on a town that folks thought was sleeping. It's about the day the Red Scorpions gang, led by a man as cruel as the desert sun, rode into Harmony Gulch expecting easy pickings. They expected fear. They expected surrender. They didn't expect Harmony Gulch. They didn't understand that sometimes the deepest strength isn't worn on the hip like a six-gun, but carried quiet in the hearts of ordinary people pushed too far. They didn't reckon on the blacksmith's forge burning hotter than just metal, or the saloon keeper's eyes seeing more than just empty glasses. No, sir. They rode into Harmony Gulch tasting triumph, but they ended up swallowing dust and ashes. Listen close now, and I'll tell you how it happened. Harmony Gulch lay nestled in a crook of the arid foothills, where Crimson Creek made a hopeful splash of green against the dominant reds and browns of the surrounding landscape. It wasn't on the main stage route, nor did the railroad plan to grace it with its iron presence anytime soon. It had sprung up a decade earlier around a modest silver strike, one that paid enough to keep folks interested, but not enough to attract the frantic, dangerous boomtown crowds. Now the silver was mostly played out, leaving Harmony Gulch to settle into a quieter rhythm, sustained by a few small ranches in the surrounding valleys, the hopeful scratchings of persistent prospectors, and the simple commerce that keeps any small community breathing. Main Street was a wide, dusty affair, lined with the usual assortment of weathered wooden buildings, a general store run by the perpetually worried Mr. Abernathy, a livery stable managed by a lanky youth named Billy, who seemed more comfortable with horses than people, a small assay office that saw more dust than ore these days, a bank, the Harmony Savings and Trust, looking perhaps a little too proud for the town's modest means, run by the precise and easily flustered Mr. Silas Croft, a church with a tall, hopeful steeple and a preacher, Reverend Miller, whose sermons often wrestled with the harsh realities of frontier life versus the gentle tenets of his faith. And of course, there was the Golden Spur Saloon and Boarding House, the social hub and heartbeat of the town, owned and operated by one Martha Riley. Life in Harmony Gulch moved at the pace of a slow horse on a hot day. Folks knew each other, maybe too well sometimes. They relied on each other for barn raisings, for help during harsh winters, for comfort during times of loss. They had carved out a fragile peace, a deliberate turning away from the violence that characterized so much of the territory. Their sheriff, Ben Brody, was testament to that peace. Young, earnest, elected more for his dependable nature and his family's long standing in the valley than for any proven skill in gunfighting. He wore his star with a quiet pride, handling the occasional drunk or stray dispute with calm negotiation rather than drawn iron. He represented the town's hope for a civilized future, a future where disagreements were settled with words, not bullets. Among the pillars of this quiet community stood Elias Thorne, the town blacksmith. A man built solid like the anvils he worked. Elias was in his late 50s, a widower whose wife, Mary, had been taken by pneumonia 5 years back, leaving a quiet sadness in eyes the color of faded blue steel. He'd come west after the war between the states, seeking to leave behind the horrors he'd witnessed, the violence he'd been forced to partake in. He rarely spoke of those years, but the set of his jaw, the occasional faraway look in his eyes when the forge fire roared particularly high, hinted at memories he fought hard to keep buried. He was a man of few words, known for his skill, his fairness, and a deep, unspoken strength that people respected. His forge, sitting at the south end of Main Street, was a place of constant rhythmic work, the ring of hammer on metal a familiar part of the town's daily soundtrack. He poured his energy, his grief, his unspoken thoughts into the shaping of iron, finding a measure of peace in the tangible results, the creation of tools that built rather than destroyed. He cherished the quiet rhythm of Harmony Gulch, the absence of gunfire, the feeling that perhaps here he could finally lay the ghosts of his past to rest. Across the street and further down sat the Golden Spur, Martha Riley's domain. Martha was a woman who defied easy categorization. Perhaps 40, perhaps older, she carried herself with a practicality honed by years of navigating the rough-and-tumble West. She'd arrived in Harmony Gulch some years back, a widow with enough saved or earned capital to buy the struggling saloon and boarding house. With sharp business sense and an even sharper tongue when necessary, she'd turned it into a clean, orderly establishment, a place where a rancher could get a decent meal and a shot of whiskey without necessarily ending up in a brawl. She missed little, her dark eyes constantly observing the flow of people and information through her doors. She knew the town's secrets, its worries, its strengths and weaknesses. While Elias represented the town's quiet strength, Martha embodied its pragmatic resilience. She kept a loaded shotgun under the bar like most saloon keepers, but hers was cleaner, better maintained than most, suggesting more than just a passing familiarity. She believed in peace, yes, but she also believed in being prepared for the day peace decided to take a vacation. Then there was Doc Higgins. The town physician, old Samuel Higgins, was as much a fixture as the dust. Grouchy, cynical, smelling faintly of antiseptic and cheap cigars, he'd seen more births, deaths, and gruesome injuries than anyone cared to count. He dispensed medical advice with a healthy dose of sarcasm, yet possessed a deep, albeit well-hidden wellspring of compassion. He'd patched up knife wounds, set countless broken bones, fought fevers and plagues, often with little more than rudimentary tools and stubborn determination. He understood the fragility of life on the frontier perhaps better than anyone, and harbored few illusions about human nature, yet he never refused to call for help, day or night. His small office, tucked between the general store and the assay office, was cluttered but functional, a place of both suffering and healing. These folks, and others like them, the Abernathys trying to make ends meet, Reverend Miller praying for souls, young Billy at the livery, Mr. Croft guarding the town's meager wealth, formed the fabric of Harmony Gulch. They were ordinary people, seeking ordinary lives, bound together by the shared challenges and small triumphs of frontier existence. They believed, perhaps naively, that their isolation, their commitment to peace, would shield them. They hadn't reckoned on the Red Scorpions. They hadn't reckoned on Caleb Grimm Ryder. The first sign of trouble wasn't a gunshot, but a tremor of unease, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. It started with whispers drifting in from outlying ranches, carried by nervous travelers passing through. Talk of a new gang, bolder, more ruthless than the usual rustlers or stage robbers. They called themselves the Red Scorpions, led by a man named Ryder, a shadowy figure credited with a string of brutal robberies and killings across the territory. They said Ryder was clever, calculating, and utterly devoid of mercy, leaving a trail of fear in his wake. Sheriff Brody heard the whispers, of course. He conferred quietly with Elias Thorne, sought counsel from Martha Riley, even endured Doc Higgins's pessimistic pronouncements. Just talk, mostly, Brody tried to reassure them, perhaps reassuring himself most of all. We're off the beaten path here. No reason for men like that to trouble Harmony Gulch. Not enough here to make it worth their while. Elias nodded slowly, his gaze drifting towards the distant hills. Hope you're right, Ben. But trouble often don't need a reason. Sometimes it just comes looking. Martha, polishing glasses behind her bar, was less sanguine. Hope ain't a strategy, Sheriff. Best be watchful. Best be prepared. She glanced meaningfully towards the shotgun beneath the counter. Doc Higgins just snorted. Prepared? Against a dozen hard cases led by some phantom killer? This town wouldn't last an hour. Best make peace with your maker, Reverend. He grumbled towards Miller, who happened to be nursing a sarsaparilla at the bar. Reverend Miller sighed. Faith is our shield, Doctor, but perhaps the Lord also expects us to, secure the gate? Despite the undercurrent of anxiety, life in Harmony Gulch continued its placid course. The sun beat down, the dust settled, Elias's hammer rang, Martha served drinks, Brody made his rounds. They clung to normalcy, hoping the storm clouds gathering on the horizon would pass them by. They didn't. It happened on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where the heat presses down like a physical weight, draining the energy, making tempers fray easily. The town drowsed in the oppressive stillness. Most folks were indoors, seeking refuge from the sun. Main Street was deserted save for a few stray dogs panting in the slivers of shade. Then came the sound. Faint at first, a low rumble, indistinct. Growing louder, resolving into the rhythmic thunder of many hoofbeats, approaching fast from the south, the direction least expected. Heads lifted. People emerged cautiously from doorways, shielding their eyes, peering down the shimmering, heat-hazed length of Main Street. They appeared suddenly, cresting the low rise at the edge of town, a dark wave of horsemen against the blinding sky. 15, maybe 20 riders, moving with disciplined speed, fanning out as they entered the street. They weren't cowboys or prospectors. They were clad in trail-worn clothes, armed to the teeth, faces hard, eyes scanning everything with cold professional assessment. At their head rode a man on a powerful black horse, a man whose presence radiated menace even at a distance. He was tall, lean, dressed in black, with eyes like chips of obsidian set in a face that looked carved from granite. A long scar, pale against his sun-darkened skin, snaked down his left cheek, giving his expression a permanent, unsettling twist. This, instinctively, everyone knew was Caleb Grim Ryder. The Red Scorpions didn't slow down. They swept into Harmony Gulch like a plague wind. Several riders peeled off immediately, heading straight for the telegraph office at the end of the street, smashing the door in. Others galloped towards the livery stable, overwhelming young Billy before he could react. Two more headed for the bank, dismounting with grim purpose. The main group, led by Ryder, pulled up sharply in front of the Golden Spur, their horses kicking up clouds of choking dust, effectively blocking the center of town. The peaceful quiet of Harmony Gulch shattered. Doors slammed shut. Faces disappeared from windows. The stray dogs vanished. A collective gasp seemed to hang in the suddenly thick, dusty air. Sheriff Brody, alerted by the commotion, emerged from his small office next to the bank, hand hovering uncertainly near the Colt Peacemaker on his hip. He took a few steps forward, then stopped, his face pale, clearly overwhelmed by the sheer number and menacing confidence of the invaders. Ryder swung down from his black horse, his movements fluid, economical. He surveyed the deserted street, the closed doors, the lone figure of the sheriff, a faint, humorless smile touching his scarred lips. He ignored Brody for the moment, turning his attention to the Golden Spur. "All right, boys," his voice rasped, loud enough to carry in the sudden silence. "Looks like the welcoming committee is a little shy. Let's see if we can liven things up. Secure the saloon. Bring everyone inside out onto the street. We need to have a little chat with the good citizens of Harmony Gulch." Several of his men dismounted, kicking open the swinging doors of the saloon, disappearing inside with drawn guns. Shouts and screams erupted from within. The wolves had arrived, the storm had broken, and the fragile peace of Harmony Gulch lay trampled in the dust beneath the boots of the Red Scorpions. Elias Thorne, watching from the deep shadows of his forge doorway, felt a cold dread grip his heart, a chilling echo of past violences he thought he'd escaped. Across the street, Martha Riley stood frozen behind her bar for just a second. Then her eyes hardened, her hand moving instinctively towards the shotgun hidden beneath the counter. The town held its breath, waiting for the terror to truly begin. The takeover of Harmony Gulch was swift, brutal, and terrifyingly efficient. Ryder's men moved with practiced coordination, their actions speaking of long experience in intimidation and control. Within minutes, the telegraph wires were cut, silencing any call for outside help. Young Billy from the livery was trussed up and tossed into an empty stall, the gang securing the best horses for their own potential needs later. The bank was breached with surprising ease. Mr. Croft, despite his initial protests, quickly succumbed to the sight of a gun barrel shoved in his face and numbly opened the vault. The small haul of cash and any valuables from deposit boxes were unceremoniously stuffed into saddlebags. The center of the storm, however, was the Golden Spur Saloon. Martha Riley, caught behind her bar as the bandits burst in, had managed to get her hands on the shotgun, but before she could bring it fully to bear, she found herself facing 3 drawn pistols. One of the bandits, a burly man with cruel eyes and breath like stale whiskey, grinned unpleasantly. "Easy now, Grandma," he sneered, nodding towards the shotgun. "Wouldn't want to spill that pretty liquor or your insides." Martha, ever the pragmatist, knew suicide when she saw it. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered the shotgun, placing it carefully back beneath the bar, her eyes never leaving the man's face, her expression a mask of cold fury. "There's no need for trouble," she said, her voice remarkably steady. "Take what you want." "Oh, we will," the man chuckled. "Starting with everyone in here. Outside. Ryder wants a word." They rounded up the handful of patrons nursing afternoon beers, the few boarders lingering in the common room, and Martha herself, herding them out into the oppressive heat and dust of Main Street. Similar scenes were unfolding elsewhere. Doors were kicked open, bewildered and terrified townsfolk Mr. Abernathy clutching his chest, Doc Higgins protesting indignantly until a rifle butt silenced him, Reverend Miller attempting to preach peace only to be roughly shoved aside, were dragged from their homes and businesses. They were forced into a frightened huddle in the middle of the street, guarded by several grim-faced bandits whose rifles remained casually leveled. Sheriff Brody, isolated and outnumbered, had made one futile attempt to intervene as the bank was being robbed, only to find himself disarmed and slammed against the wall, his badge contemptuously ripped from his vest and thrown into the dust. He now stood among the hostages, his face bruised, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and helpless rage. Caleb Grim Ryder watched the proceedings from the shade of the saloon's porch overhang, leaning casually against a post, rolling a cigarette with deliberate slowness. He surveyed the frightened faces of the townsfolk, the dusty street, the collection of modest buildings. His obsidian eyes missed nothing. He seemed to be assessing, calculating, savoring the fear he inspired. When most of the accessible townsfolk were gathered, maybe 30 or 40 souls huddled together under the guns, Ryder finally pushed himself off the post and strolled into the center of the street, the dust puffing around his spurred boots. Silence fell, broken only by the whimpering of a frightened child and the nervous stamping of the bandits' horses. "Well now," Ryder began, his voice carrying easily in the stillness, a deceptively soft rasp that nonetheless commanded attention. "Harmony Gulch. Sounds downright peaceful." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "My apologies for disrupting your harmony. Name's Ryder. Caleb Ryder. Perhaps you've heard of me?" A few involuntary gasps answered him. The name, the reputation, was clearly known, adding another layer to their terror. "Thought so," Ryder nodded, satisfied. "Now, we ain't unreasonable men. We're just entrepreneurs. Collectin' investment capital, you might say." He gestured towards the saddlebags bulging with the bank's money. "Your local institution has made a generous, if slightly involuntary, contribution, but I suspect this fine town has a little more to offer." His gaze swept over the hostages, lingering on the women, assessing the men. "We'll be staying a short while, enjoying your hospitality. We require food, liquor, fresh horses when we need 'em, and cooperation. Complete, unquestioning cooperation." His voice hardened slightly. "Try anything foolish, try to be a hero, and people will get hurt. Badly. Starting with your women and children. Am I understood?" No one spoke. Fear held them paralyzed. Ryder waited a beat, then nodded. "Good. Glad we understand each other." He turned to his second-in-command, a wiry, dangerous-looking man named Fitch. "Fitch, organize supplies. Take whatever we need from the store. Abernathy, ain't it?" He nodded towards the trembling storekeeper. "You'll assist Mr. Fitch. Gladly. He pointed towards Martha. Ma'am, the saloon is now our headquarters. You'll keep the liquor flowing. For my men. On the house, naturally. He then issued further orders, posting guards at the ends of town, assigning men to watch the hostages, turning Harmony Gulch into an occupied territory. His control was absolute, his confidence chilling. He clearly believed the town was utterly cowed, its spirit broken before the fight had even begun. From the shadows of his forge, Elias Thorne watched it all, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, the knuckles white. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to grab the heavy hammer, the nearest piece of iron, and charge out there. But he saw the rifles, the sheer numbers, the cold certainty in Ryder's eyes. He saw the terror on his neighbors' faces. A direct confrontation now would be suicide, a massacre. He remembered the chaos of battle, the futility of disorganized courage against disciplined firepower. He forced himself to stay hidden, to watch, to wait. The old soldier's discipline warring with the protective fury of a man seeing his home, his peace, violated. The helplessness was a bitter bile in his throat. Martha Riley, forced back behind her bar, served whiskey to the triumphant bandits with outward composure, but her mind raced. She noted Fitch's arrogant demeanor as he looted the general store, saw the fear and despair in the eyes of the hostages huddled outside, felt the oppressive weight of the gang's presence settling over the town like a shroud. She knew Ryder wasn't just after supplies and the bank's meager funds. Men like him thrived on fear, on domination. They would likely terrorize the town for a day or two, taking whatever they pleased, before riding out, perhaps leaving fire and death in their wake. Waiting, hoping they would simply leave, wasn't an option. Compliance wouldn't guarantee safety. It would only prolong the suffering. Someone had to do something. But what? And how? The odds seemed impossible. Yet as she refilled a bandit's glass, her eyes met Elias Thorne's gaze across the dusty street, a fleeting, almost imperceptible connection. In that shared look, a silent question passed between them. Can we let this stand? Doc Higgins, forced back into his office after his initial protest, ostensibly to be available if needed but effectively under house arrest, paced his cluttered room like a caged badger. He cursed Ryder, cursed the bandits, cursed the town's helplessness. He checked his meager supply of medicines, his surgical tools, his mind automatically preparing for the injuries he knew were likely to come. But beneath the gruff exterior, a different kind of calculation was taking place. He knew poisons as well as cures. He knew anatomy. He knew the effects of certain chemicals readily available in his supplies, or even at the assay office next door. Violence wasn't his way, but preventing greater violence. Perhaps desperate times called for desperate remedies. He paused, looking at a dusty bottle of chloroform on a high shelf, then at the laudanum he kept locked away. Unconventional weapons, perhaps, but potentially effective against unsuspecting thugs. Sheriff Brody, huddled with the hostages, felt the burning sting of shame and impotence. His badge lay in the dust. His gun was gone. He had failed his town in its moment of greatest need. He saw the fear in the eyes of the people who had elected him, trusted him. He saw Ryder's smug confidence, Fitch's sneering arrogance. Despair threatened to crush him, but then he saw Elias, watchful in the shadows. He saw Martha, serving drinks with a mask of calm defiance. He saw the resilience, however fragile, that still flickered in the eyes of his neighbors. Maybe it wasn't over yet. If he couldn't lead the fight, maybe he could still contribute. He started subtly observing the bandits. How many there were exactly, who seemed jumpy, who looked like the real threats, where the guards were positioned, their routines. Information. That was something he could gather, something that might be useful, if an opportunity, however slim, ever arose. The sun beat down relentlessly. The red scorpions settled in, drinking, laughing coarsely, enjoying their dominion over the terrified town. They seemed utterly convinced of their victory. But beneath the surface of fear and compliance, in the shadowed forge, behind the saloon bar, within the cluttered doctor's office, and even amidst the despairing hostages, the first, faint sparks of an unexpected resistance were beginning to glow. Harmony Gulch was wounded. terrified, but perhaps not entirely broken. The wolves were in the fold, yes, but they hadn't yet counted the cost of rousing the flock from its slumber. As the afternoon wore on under the oppressive thumb of the red scorpions, a grim routine settled over Harmony Gulch. The bandits, confident in their control, grew bolder, more careless. They broke into homes searching for valuables, their boots muddying clean floors, their rough hands pawing through private belongings. They demanded food from kitchens, commandeered liquor from the Golden Spur, their laughter echoing unnervingly down the silent street. Most of the townsfolk remained huddled hostages in the center of town, guarded by a rotating handful of riders' men, while others were forced into servitude. Abernathy trembling as he bagged supplies under Fitch's watchful eye, Martha enduring lewd remarks as she poured endless drinks, young women forced to cook for their captors under the strained supervision of Reverend Miller's equally terrified wife. Sheriff Brody, still among the hostages, continued his quiet observations. He counted 15 bandits currently visible, including Ryder and Fitch. He noted that while most seemed like typical hard cases, a couple looked younger, almost nervous, their eyes darting around, perhaps new recruits not fully comfortable with Ryder's methods. He saw that the guards watching the hostages tended to gather in the shade, occasionally passing a bottle back and forth, their vigilance potentially dulled by the heat and the whiskey. Small details, perhaps meaningless, but he stored them away. Elias Thorne remained near his forge, ostensibly cleaning up, but his mind was working furiously. He saw the hostages suffering in the sun, saw the fear in their eyes, heard the bandits' arrogant shouts. The desire for peace warred fiercely with the rising tide of protective anger. He thought of Mary, how she had loved this town, its quiet ways. He thought of the men he'd fought alongside, the promises they'd made to build a better world after the war. Letting these thugs tear it all apart felt like a betrayal of everything he held dear. He knew direct confrontation was suicide, but maybe not direct. He looked at his forge, still hot from the morning's work, looked at the heavy chains, the tongs, the piles of scrap iron, the barrels of water used for quenching. Tools of creation. Could they become tools of defense? His mind, long dormant in the ways of conflict, began to stir, recalling old tactics, thinking about choke points, diversions, the element of surprise. Martha Riley, behind the bar, was a nexus of observation. Bandits came and went, talking loudly, boasting, drinking heavily. She learned snippets of information, heard Fitch complaining about Ryder's plan to stay the night. "Should hit 'em and get 'em, boss," he'd grumbled to another bandit when Ryder was out of earshot. Lingering is asking for trouble. She noted rivalries, saw which bandits seemed loyal to Ryder, which ones followed Fitch more closely. She also saw opportunities. A spilled drink creating a slippery patch near the door. The location of spare ammunition belts carelessly slung over chairbacks. The way the setting sun would soon shine directly through the west-facing windows, potentially blinding anyone looking out from inside. And crucially, she found moments for whispered words. When Doc Higgins was briefly allowed inside to tend to Abernathy, who felt faint from the heat and fear, Martha managed a quick, hushed exchange near the back room. "Elias," she whispered. Higgins nodded grimly. Thinking. Waiting. "Brody?" "Watching," Higgins breathed back. "Any ideas, Doc?" Higgins glanced towards the whiskey bottles lining the shelf. "Maybe. Depends how thirsty they stay." A silent understanding passed between them before Higgins was ushered back outside. Doc Higgins, back in his office, ostensibly resting, worked quickly. He located a small bottle of concentrated capsicum oil, normally used in liniments for sore muscles. Highly irritating if ingested or splashed in the eyes. He found his bottle of chloroform, carefully wrapping it in a cloth to muffle the sound. He considered the laudanum, a powerful sedative. Too slow-acting, perhaps, but maybe useful later. He also gathered several glass bottles and stoppers, thinking about the assay office next door. He knew they kept acids for testing ore and other volatile chemicals. A noxious smoke, perhaps? Something to create chaos, confusion. His methods were unconventional, born of desperation and a healer's knowledge of human vulnerability. The catalyst for action came as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky orange and casting long shadows down Main Street. Ryder, emerging from the saloon after a long conference with a bottle of Martha's best whiskey, seemed bored. He surveyed the miserable hostages, then his eyes landed on Sarah Miller, the preacher's young, pretty wife, who was huddled protectively over her small son. A cruel smile touched Ryder's lips. "Well now," he drawled, strolling towards the hostages. "The entertainment's been a little dry this afternoon." He stopped in front of Sarah, looking her up and down with an insolent gaze that made her shrink back. "Maybe the preacher's wife could liven things up, sing us a song perhaps, or maybe a dance." Reverend Miller surged forward, his face pale with terror but unable to remain silent. "Sir, please, leave her be. She means no harm." One of the guards shoved Miller back violently, sending him sprawling in the dust. "Shut up, preacher," Ryder chuckled, clearly enjoying the scene. He reached out towards Sarah. "Come now, don't be shy." That was the spark. Seeing Sarah threatened, seeing the Reverend humiliated, something snapped in the collective consciousness of the hostages. A low murmur went through the crowd, a sound of anger finally overcoming fear. Sheriff Brody seized the moment. He might be disarmed, but he still had his voice. "Leave her alone, Ryder," he yelled, stepping forward, positioning himself between Ryder and Sarah. "This has gone far enough." Ryder turned, surprised by the defiance. His eyes narrowed dangerously. "Has it now, Sheriff without a badge? You want to be the first example?" He drew his pistol, leveling it at Brody's chest. Time seemed to stop. The hostages gasped. The bandits tensed. Suddenly, a deafening clang echoed from the south end of town. Elias Thorne stood in the doorway of his forge, hammering rhythmically on a massive piece of iron, the sound shattering the tense silence, drawing every eye towards him. It was a deliberate, calculated distraction. Ryder hesitated, momentarily thrown off balance by the unexpected noise. In that instant of hesitation, Martha Riley acted. From behind the bar, she hurled a heavy whiskey bottle, not at Ryder, but at the base of the large, ornate oil lamp hanging precariously over the center of the saloon, a lamp she knew was prone to leaking. The bottle shattered, splashing oil. Simultaneously, she kicked over a nearby table, sending glasses crashing, creating chaos inside the saloon. "Fire!" she screamed, hoping to draw bandits inside, away from the street. At the same moment, Doc Higgins, who had managed to position himself near the alley beside his office, uncorked the bottle of chloroform and tossed it into the midst of the guards watching the hostages. The volatile liquid vaporized quickly in the heat, the sickly sweet smell hitting the guards. They coughed, confused, their eyes watering. One staggered, suddenly dizzy. Another, the one who had shoved the Reverend, inhaled more deeply and slumped to his knees, momentarily incapacitated. It was chaos. Planned chaos. The hostages didn't need telling twice. Spurred by Brody's defiance and the sudden confusion among their guards, they surged. Not attacking, but scattering, running for cover, creating pandemonium. Brody tackled the staggering guard nearest him, wrestling for the man's rifle. Abernathy, surprisingly agile, helped haul the dazed Reverend Miller towards the cover of the general store porch. Elias Thorne used the confusion he created. He kicked over a barrel of quenching water at the forge entrance, creating a slippery, steaming mess. Then, grabbing a heavy chain, he swung it like a medieval flail, intercepting two bandits who had started towards the forge, sending them crashing into the mud and steam. Inside the saloon, Fitch yelled orders, trying to restore control amidst the smoke from the now burning spilled lamp oil, Martha having discreetly tossed a match, and the panicked shouts. Some bandits rushed towards the fire, others towards the street where the hostages were scattering. Ryder, momentarily forgotten in the eruption, roared in fury. He fired his pistol towards the fleeing hostages, hitting no one in the panicked confusion, then realized the situation was rapidly spiraling out of his control. "Fitch! Control the street! Shoot anyone who resists!" He turned towards the forge, recognizing Elias as the source of the initial clang, the start of the unraveling. "You! Blacksmith! You'll pay for that!" He started towards the forge, pistol raised. The fierce, unexpected fight had begun. It wasn't a coordinated military assault, but a desperate, chaotic eruption of resistance, sparked by indignation and fueled by the quick thinking of Elias, Martha, Doc, and the courage of Sheriff Brody. The carefully constructed control of the Red Scorpions shattered in moments, replaced by gunfire, smoke, shouts, and the scrambling confusion of a town suddenly, violently, fighting back. The wolves were no longer leisurely enjoying the fold. They were caught in a whirlwind, facing not sheep, but cornered, desperate creatures with nothing left to lose. The battle for Harmony Gulch was truly joined. The eruption of chaos transformed Harmony Gulch into a whirlwind of desperate action. What the townsfolk lacked in firepower and experience, they compensated for with knowledge of their surroundings, righteous fury, and unexpected ingenuity. The battle fragmented, becoming a series of smaller, simultaneous confrontations across the length of Main Street. Inside the Golden Spur, Martha Riley used the spreading fire and smoke as cover. As bandits choked and stumbled, distracted by the flames licking up the walls, she retrieved her shotgun from under the bar. The burly bandit who had threatened her earlier turned, eyes streaming from the smoke, raising his pistol. Martha didn't hesitate. The shotgun roared, the blast echoing even above the pandemonium. The bandit crashed backward through a table, silenced permanently. Martha quickly reloaded, her face grim, taking cover behind the overturned bar, ready to defend her territory. Fitch, Ryder's second-in-command, realizing the saloon was becoming a death trap, yelled for his remaining men to pull back, to regroup on the street, abandoning the attempt to control the fire or recapture the building. Outside, Sheriff Brody managed to wrestle the rifle away from the dazed guard. He didn't shoot immediately but used the rifle butt to disable the man, then scrambled for cover behind a horse trough, joining the fight. He saw Mr. Abernathy, the timid storekeeper, appear in the doorway of the general store, surprisingly holding an old but functional buffalo rifle. Abernathy, it turned out, had been quite the hunter in his youth, and fear for his wife and property had overcome his usual nervousness. He took careful aim and fired, hitting one of the bandits near the bank, causing the man to cry out and stumble for cover. Doc Higgins, having deployed his chloroform surprise, wasn't idle. He darted back into his office, emerging moments later with several stoppered glass bottles containing a noxious mixture pilfered from the assay office next door, likely sulfur-based compounds. Watching Fitch trying to rally his men near the center of the street, Higgins hurled 2 of the bottles. They shattered on the hard-packed dirt, releasing clouds of acrid, yellow smoke that billowed outwards, choking and blinding the bandits caught within it. They scattered, coughing violently, their temporary formation broken. Elias Thorne, meanwhile, faced Ryder's vengeful advance towards the forge. Ryder fired his pistol, the shot pinging off the anvil near Elias's head. Elias didn't flinch. Instead of reaching for a gun, he owned one but rarely touched it. He used his environment. With a powerful heave, he tipped over a rack of heavy iron bars, sending them crashing down, forcing Ryder to jump back. Then, grabbing a pair of long blacksmith's tongs, still warm from the forge, he faced Ryder. It wasn't a gun, but in his hands, the heavy iron tool looked menacing. "Get out of my town, Ryder," Elias growled, his voice low and dangerous. Ryder, momentarily taken aback by the blacksmith's ferocity and unconventional weapon, snarled, "You first, old man." He fired again. Elias deflected the shot with a surprisingly swift movement of the tongs, the bullet whining away harmlessly. This wasn't the easy target Ryder expected. Elias wasn't just a blacksmith. He moved with the grounded, dangerous economy of a man who had faced death before and wasn't intimidated now. The battle raged. Townsfolk, emboldened by the initial successes, joined the fray. Men emerged from hiding with hunting rifles, shotguns, even old pistols. Women hurled rocks, pots, anything they could find from upper windows. Reverend Miller, horrified by the violence but desperate to help, organized efforts to drag the wounded, both townsfolk and bandits, into the relative safety of the church, turning the sanctuary into a makeshift infirmary where Doc Higgins, when he wasn't deploying chemical warfare, could tend to the injured. The Red Scorpions, caught completely off guard by the ferocity and coordination of the resistance, were losing cohesion. They were trained for quick raids, intimidation, overwhelming unprepared victims, not a protracted street fight against determined defenders who knew every alley, every doorway, every rooftop. Their numbers began to dwindle. Several were down, wounded or dead, from Abernathy's rifle, Martha's shotgun, Brody's reclaimed firepower, or the scattered shots from other townsfolk. The noxious smoke and the fire in the saloon added to the confusion and panic. Fitch, choking on the yellow fumes but still dangerous, managed to rally a few men near the bank. He saw Sheriff Brody coordinating fire from behind the trough. Fitch took careful aim, ready to eliminate the lawman. But before he could fire, a shot cracked from the livery stable. Young Billy, apparently having worked himself free, had found an old rifle left behind by a customer. His shot went wide of Fitch but forced the bandit leader to duck for cover, disrupting his aim. Ryder, locked in a tense standoff with Elias Thorne near the forge, realized the situation was deteriorating rapidly. His men were scattered, disorganized, falling. The town wasn't breaking. It was fighting back with a fury he hadn't anticipated. His plan for easy plunder and a leisurely stay had turned into a bloody nightmare. Rage burned in his eyes, overriding caution. He had to break the blacksmith, break the town's spirit, reassert control. He feinted left, then lunged right, firing his pistol rapidly. Elias sidestepped, using the anvil for cover, the bullets ricocheting wildly. As Ryder paused to reload, Elias saw his chance. He wasn't aiming to kill, not if he could help it. The ghosts of the war were still too close. He grabbed a heavy hammer from the workbench, its weight familiar in his hand. With a roar born of righteous anger and grief, he charged out from behind the anvil. Ryder, fumbling with his reload, looked up, startled by the blacksmith's sudden, furious assault. He raised his pistol, but too late. Elias swung the heavy hammer in a powerful arc, not at Ryder's head, but at his gun hand. The impact was brutal. Bones crunched. Ryder screamed in agony, his pistol flying from his shattered hand, clattering uselessly in the dust. He staggered back, clutching his mangled hand, his face contorted in pain and disbelief. Seeing their leader injured, his pistol gone, seemed to break the remaining morale of the bandits near the forge. They hesitated, looking towards the chaos down the street, then back at the formidable blacksmith standing over their agonized leader. "Get out!" Elias bellowed, his voice echoing down the street, hammer still held high. "Get out of Harmony Gulch now!" Fitch, seeing Ryder fall back, seeing his men wavering, knew the fight was lost. Their numbers were drastically reduced, their leader injured, the town still spitting fire. Staying meant annihilation. "Scorpions!" he yelled, his voice hoarse. "Pull back! To the horses! Move!" The remaining bandits needed no second urging. Those still able turned and ran, scrambling for their horses tethered near the edge of town, firing parting shots wildly as they retreated. Fitch grabbed Ryder, hauling the injured, cursing leader towards a horse, shoving him into the saddle. Within moments, the remnants of the Red Scorpions, maybe half their original number, many nursing wounds, were galloping frantically out of town, disappearing back into the hills the way they had come, leaving behind their dead, their wounded, and their shattered arrogance. Silence descended on Main Street, broken only by the crackling of the fire still consuming part of the saloon, the groans of the wounded, and the ragged breathing of the defenders. Dust and smoke hung heavy in the air, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. Townsfolk slowly emerged from cover, weapons still held ready, looking around in disbelief. They had done it. They had faced down Grim Rider and his notorious gang. They had fought back. They had won. Elias Thorne slowly lowered the hammer, the adrenaline draining away, leaving him trembling, the weight of his actions settling upon him. Martha Riley emerged from the smoking saloon, shotgun still in hand, her face smudged with soot, surveying the street. Sheriff Brody stood tall, rifle held firmly, his earlier shame replaced by a quiet pride in his town. Doc Higgins was already moving among the wounded, his gruff voice surprisingly gentle. Harmony Gulch was scarred, battered, and grieving its losses, but it was still standing. The harmony had been broken, violently interrupted, but in its place, something else had been forged in the heat of battle, a fierce, undeniable, collective strength. The quiet town had found its roar. The immediate aftermath was a blur of grim necessity. The fire in the Golden Spur was contained, though a significant portion of the building was gutted, charred timbers testifying to the ferocity of the blaze. Doc Higgins, aided by Reverend Miller and several of the townswomen, worked tirelessly, tending to the wounded in the makeshift infirmary set up in the church. There were casualties on both sides. Several bandits lay dead in the street, grim testament to the town's defense. Harmony Gulch had not escaped unscathed either. 2 townsfolk had fallen, caught in the crossfire, and several more nursed gunshot wounds or injuries sustained in the chaos. Young Billy from the livery had taken a stray bullet in the arm after his brave shot at Fitch, but Doc Higgins declared he'd recover fully. Mr. Abernathy, despite his surprising marksmanship, had collapsed afterward, his heart taxed by the excitement and fear, needing the doc's immediate attention. Silas Thorne, his hammer laid aside, moved among his neighbors, offering quiet words of comfort, helping secure the town, his earlier reluctance replaced by a heavy sense of responsibility. He avoided looking directly at the bodies of the bandits he may have injured or indirectly caused the death of, the cost of defending peace weighing heavily upon him. Yet, as he saw the resilience in the eyes of his neighbors, the way they came together to clear the street, care for the injured, and offer support to the bereaved, a different feeling began to emerge. Not pride, exactly, but a deep, abiding respect for the community he had chosen, the community that had refused to break. Martha Riley, surveying the damage to her saloon, her livelihood, showed no outward sign of despair. Instead, she organized. She directed the cleanup, found temporary lodging for her boarders, brewed pot after pot of strong coffee for the exhausted defenders and helpers, her pragmatic nature asserting itself even amidst the wreckage. When Sheriff Brody approached her, his face etched with gratitude and newfound respect, she simply nodded. "We did what needed doing, Sheriff. Now we clean up the mess." But there was a new light in her eyes, a spark of satisfaction perhaps, knowing she hadn't just observed, she had acted, decisively and effectively. Sheriff Brody moved through the town with a new authority. He had been tested, found wanting initially perhaps, but ultimately found his courage alongside his neighbors. He organized patrols, oversaw the grim task of dealing with the dead bandits, burying them in unmarked graves well outside of town limits, and began the process of restoring order. He knew his reputation had been salvaged, perhaps even enhanced, not by his own actions alone, but by being part of the town's collective stand. He approached Elias, clapping a hand on the blacksmith's broad shoulder. "Elias, we owe you. That distraction. It started everything." Elias shook his head, looking down at his calloused hands. "We all did what we had to, Ben. Just glad most of us are still here to talk about it." The ghosts of the past felt closer now, but strangely, less menacing. He had faced violence again, not sought it, but faced it to protect his home, his neighbors. Maybe peace wasn't just the absence of conflict, but the willingness to defend what mattered, even at great cost. News of the failed raid on Harmony Gulch spread through the territory like wildfire. The story grew with each telling. The quiet town that turned on one of the most feared gangs, the blacksmith who faced down Ryder with naught but a hammer, the saloon keeper who held off bandits amidst fire and smoke, the doctor who fought with fumes, the storekeeper who shot like a veteran. The defeat was a humiliation for Ryder, shattering his aura of invincibility. The Red Scorpions, decimated and disgraced, reportedly fragmented soon after, their reign of terror effectively ended not by territorial marshals or the army, but by the citizens of a small, overlooked town. Harmony Gulch healed, slowly but surely. The burned section of the Golden Spur was rebuilt, stronger than before, a symbol of the town's resilience. The scars remained, empty chairs at family tables, the lingering memories of fear and violence. But something fundamental had changed. The complacency was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence, a shared understanding of their collective strength. They had looked into the abyss and refused to blink. They learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. They learned that leadership could emerge from unexpected places, and that the most ordinary people could possess extraordinary reserves of grit when pushed. They learned that harmony wasn't a passive state, but an active commitment, something worth fighting for. Elias Thorne continued to work his forge, the rhythmic clang of his hammer now seeming less a lament, more a steady heartbeat for the town that had rediscovered its soul. Martha Riley continued to run the Golden Spur, her sharp eyes missing nothing, her presence a reassuring constant. Sheriff Brody served with quiet competence, knowing he had the full backing of a community that had proven its mettle. And Doc Higgins continued to dispense medicine and cynical wisdom, perhaps with a slightly less gruff edge than before. They, and all the people of Harmony Gulch, carried the knowledge of what they had faced and what they had found within themselves. And that's the way it happened in Harmony Gulch. A testament, etched in dust and smoke and memory, to the spirit that built the West. Not just the rugged individualism you hear so much about, but the tougher, quieter courage of community. The wolves came, yes, bold and snarling, expecting easy prey. But they found shepherds willing to stand their ground, and a flock that had teeth and claws of its own. It reminds us, doesn't it, that strength often lies hidden beneath the surface? In the blacksmith's quiet hands, tempered by fire and loss. In the saloon keeper's watchful eyes, seeing the path through chaos. In the doctor's unconventional knowledge turned to defense. In the ordinary folks who, when faced with the unacceptable, found something extraordinary within themselves. They didn't have grand titles or famous reputations, but they had grit, they had ingenuity, and crucially, they had each other. The lesson from Harmony Gulch ain't about the glory of violence. Elias Thorne would be the first to tell you that violence leaves scars, always. No, the lesson is about the nature of peace. It isn't just a quiet street or an absence of trouble. Real peace, the kind that endures, has roots. It needs defending. It requires vigilance, courage, and the willingness to stand together when darkness rides into town. It teaches us that underestimating the quiet ones, the ordinary ones, is a fool's mistake. Because when everything is on the line, courage can bloom in the most unexpected gardens. So, think on Harmony Gulch. Think on Elias and Martha, on Brody and Doc Higgins, and all the others who chose to fight back. Their story is a thread in the vast, complex tapestry of the American West, a tale of how common folk, bound by shared hardship and a refusal to surrender, could forge their own justice, their own destiny, under that wide and unforgiving sky. If this story struck a chord, if it reminded you of the strength that lies in community and the courage that can be found in unexpected places, then share it. Let the tale of Harmony Gulch echo. Tell us what you think below. What does it take to defend your community? Where does true strength come from? And if you're eager for more stories pulled from the heartwood of the West, tales of trial and triumph, be sure to subscribe. There are many more campfires to share, many more stories waiting to be told. Until next time, keep your powder dry, your friendships true, and never underestimate the quiet neighbor next door.